Hi there, this is Tony from pianotone.ca, and this is just a quick video on cables. Let's check it out. Okay, I want to emphasize that I am not an audio engineer or a specialist. I've just picked up some info along the way that I'd like to share, so I wanted to make kind of an intro-level video for those just getting started with music, keyboards, digital pianos, mixers, audio interfaces, recording, all of that stuff. That quickly goes over the main types of cables that you're likely to encounter, and in particular I want to give kind of an intro into what balanced versus unbalanced means with cables, because I think sometimes that gets a little confused with mono and stereo. So before I start talking about cables specifically, I want to quickly describe what a balanced signal is. A balanced signal is when you send an audio wave as well as a duplicate of that audio wave that has been inverted. When that balanced signal reaches its destination, the inverted wave gets flipped back and rejoins the main wave. What's the purpose behind all of this? Basically, it prevents noise and interference from other electronic sources from being picked up along the way. So if you look at this picture, the top shows how your audio wave is being sent, and then the bottom picture shows the same audio wave, only it's inverted. Now, if you pick up noise along the way, it's going to be picked up as shown here, and it will be the same on both of your signals. So when the inverted signal of your audio gets flipped back, and the noise also gets flipped back, and now the two noise signals cancel each other out from the main wave, and you've got a nice clean signal at the other end. Okay, so now let's start looking at some cables. This is a cable you've probably seen. It's a 1/4 inch TS instrument cable, looks like that. And this is what a standard guitar or instrument cable looks like. Now inside this cable are two wires. One is attached to the tip, and one is attached to the sleeve, which is hence the TS name. Now one is a ground wire, and the other is a wire that can carry an audio wave. So if I asked you to guess, is this signal going to be mono or stereo? And you guessed mono. Since there's only one wire to send an audio wave with, then you would be correct. And if I was to ask you if you thought this was a balanced or an unbalanced signal, if you were to guess unbalanced, since there's only one wire to carry the audio, so there's no way to send that second inverted audio wave, you would also be correct. So far, so good. So now let's look at a TRS cable. TRS cable, this one's also a 1/4 inch, so it kind of looks the same, except this has a third wire, and that's attached to the ring. You see you've now got two black stripes, so you've got the tip, the ring, and the sleeve. So there's now a third wire inside this cable. So if I was to ask you if this cable is going to send a stereo signal since it has an extra wire, many people, including myself until I learned a little bit more about cables, would answer yes. The correct answer is actually maybe. And then if I was to ask, okay, but will the signal be a balanced signal since it has that extra wire? Well, once again, maybe. And that's because that extra wire can only do one or the other. It can either A, send a second different audio wave entirely, which results in a stereo signal, so left and right, or B, it can send an inverted copy of the original audio wave, which results in a balanced signal. So depending on what this cable is connected to, it can either send an unbalanced stereo signal or a balanced mono signal. So onto another cable you've probably encountered and probably call a mic cable. This is an XLR cable, and I'm showing you a picture of this instead of holding one up because I only have one and I'm using it right now to record this video. Now these three prongs that you see are a clue to what's inside here. You guessed it, there's one ground and two wires, so like a TRS cable, an XLR cable can send an unbalanced stereo signal or a balanced mono signal. Now one more cable type to quickly talk about is RCA cable. These have been around for quite a while, and you probably recognize them from stereo or TV equipment you've owned along the way. These are unbalanced cables, and you're often going to see them in groups of two like this, where they're actually kind of like one cable with two cables that are attached to each other, basically. And each one of those is going to have one ground wire and one signal wire. So these are unbalanced cables. So now you might be wondering, with TRS and XLR cables, what determines whether you are getting a balanced mono or unbalanced stereo signal? Well, it actually has nothing to do with the cable itself. It has to do with what it is connected to at each end. It's the ports that decide this. So if a port is sending a balanced mono signal and you have a cable capable of carrying that signal, and the port the cable is connected to at the other end is capable of receiving that balanced signal, then you've got a balanced signal. So for example, if I was to connect a TRS cable to the 1/4 inch port on my bass guitar, and then the other end to the 1/4 inch port on my amp, would I be getting a balanced signal? Well, the port on the guitar is only going to send a mono signal, and it's an unbalanced port. And most likely the port on the guitar amp, especially that one, is going to be unbalanced. So the cable's still going to work, but one of those wires isn't going to be doing anything. So you're not going to see any benefit from using a TRS instead of a TS cable. And the TRS cable costs quite a bit more. So you're going to be costing yourself a little bit of money unnecessarily. So what about a microphone connected to a mixer with an XLR cable? Well, in this case, mics are configured, they are configured to send a mono signal, but they also are configured to send a balanced signal out of an XLR male port. So it will, in almost all cases, unless you have a really cheaply made mixer, it's going to be a balanced signal because that mic port on the mixer is going to be, is most likely to be balanced. Now, this is a good thing since in a live setting, a singer's mic can often be a long distance from what it's connected to. So that's going to help prevent noise. So just as a quick test for you, I found this old cable from my old band days. So it's got the XLR connection, so that's balanced to connect to my mic. The other end of this is a 1/4" TS. So do you think I'm going to get a balanced signal if I plug this into my mixer, into a balanced port on the mixer? Answer is no, because I've only got a TS cable at this end. This cable's actually more intended to be plugging a mic into like an amp if you're going to share an amp with a guitar player or something. Okay, so what about a keyboard or a digital piano? Well, there's a bunch of different examples here, but my channel does focus on pianos and keyboards, so I'm going to try and go through some of the common examples. So example one is your keyboard has dedicated line outputs, whether this is actually the best case scenario. So if your keyboard has separate 1/4" left and right line outs, like my Casio PXS 1100 digital piano does, they're almost guaranteed to be unbalanced ports. I have read that some fancy professional keyboards will have balanced outputs, but I've looked at in stores at $5,000 Nord Electros that still have unbalanced ports. If you do encounter a keyboard that does have balanced line outs, they're probably going to be very explicitly labeled, and they're probably going to be XLR, so mic cable ports as opposed to the 1/4" ones. So it's going to be obvious. So in that case, with my piano with unbalanced outputs, I don't need to use a TRS cable. Now in this case, depending on what you're connecting your keyboard to at the other end is going to indicate your cable choice. Preferably, if you're connecting to something like an amp or a PA mixer audio interface that has 2 line level inputs available, then you're just going to use 2 1/4" TS cables. So one out of your left input and then one out of your right input into the 2 available ports on the device you're connecting to. So what if your destination only has 1 input available? Well, if that input is a stereo input, and you might encounter that as an auxiliary in on a mixer or an amp or a stereo or something, that's often used for connecting an iPad or a music player, so it's expecting a stereo signal, then you could use a splitter cable like this with 2 1/4" TS jacks at one end, and then it has a TRS, so capable of transmitting stereo at the other end, and then that one would go into your destination. So now what if that one input that's available is not a stereo input, it's just a mono input, like a line input on an amp or a mixer or something, and you've only got the one available? Then what you would do is you would go back to your 1/4" TS cable, and you would connect that to your left mono output on your keyboard. You would ignore your right output. Now, most keyboards will have left and right line outs that will automatically send a mix of left and right as a mono signal out of the left port if you don't plug anything into the right port. It's not quite as nice sounding, but it does work. So then you would connect that into your left/mono and then the other end into your destination. So what about a keyboard that doesn't have dedicated line outputs like my Casio Tone CTS1? In that case, you're going to be using the headphone port, which is a stereo signal, but then as far as what kind of cable you're going to use, it depends what you're connecting to. So if your destination has 2 line inputs available, then you can use the same kind of splitter that I was showing you before, except in the other direction. So I'd use a cable like this again. This one is basically the same as one I was showing you before, except this end is a 1/8" size jack instead of the 1/4", but it's the same basic design of cable, where this end is going to go into my headphone out on my keyboard, which is stereo, and then it's going to split that signal into left and right mono TRS jacks, and then those are going to go into your destination, into those 2 available ports. Now, if your destination only has one line input available, is it stereo? So like the auxiliary input on a mixer or on an amplifier or something that is a stereo input, then you can use a single TRS cable, and this could be 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch. But that's basically just going to be going from your headphone out into that stereo in on the destination, and then you should get a stereo signal that way. Now, if the one available port is not a stereo port, then you would need to use a cable like this that's a TRS to TS cable, and once again could be 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch at either end, depending on what you're connecting to. But the TRS side goes in your headphone port, and then you're going to get just a single mono signal out of the TS side that is going into the destination. So one more connection type to talk about, connecting one piece of audio equipment to another. Good example here is connecting a mixer, like this new one that I just got that I'm going to be doing a review on soon, to an audio interface. So for example, let's say I have multiple mics and instruments connected into here. I'm jamming with some other musicians. So I've got all the levels adjusted in this, and then the outputs for this are going into my audio interface so that I can do a recording of us playing. Well, that's actually going to depend on the equipment that you have, so check your manuals. But usually, decent quality mixers will have left and right main outputs that are balanced, and my inputs on my audio interface are also balanced. So in this case, I would get a better and cleaner signal using TRS cables from the main outs on my mixer into the inputs on my audio interface. The TS cables will work just fine. It's just if you are in a situation where you might be picking up some noise or it's a long distance, then the TRS cables are going to give you a better quality signal. Now, just a quick note on adapters. For example, this is a 1/4 inch adapter that will take a 1/8 inch input, and it's TRS. So when you're using adapters, you just want to make sure that the type of adapter matches what you're plugging into it. So this is a TRS adapter. So I would want to use that with a TRS 1/8 inch cable, like that. So I did want to mention, before you go running out and buying balanced cables and making sure that you have equipment that will work with balanced cables, if it's for a home studio, looks like kind of like this one, which is pretty small, not a lot of stuff, it really isn't the end of the world if you're using unbalanced cables anyways, because there isn't a lot of equipment here and there's not a lot of distance going on between connections. So unbalanced cables are probably going to be just fine. The one situation where you might want to consider trying to look into whether balanced cables are going to help you out at all is if let's say you're in a band, you've got a practice space that's larger, you've got a lot of equipment, a lot of people, there's cables all over the place, so there's a little more chance for noise to creep into your recordings. In that case, that's when you might want to maybe look into whether or not balanced cables can help you out. Now, one more thing to mention, and it is beyond the scope of this video, but some of you might be wondering, if you need to have a super long cable from your unbalanced output to reach your destination, what can you do to try and alleviate this picking up noise issue? Well, that's where a DI box comes in. These little gadgets will take a balanced signal input and output a balanced one. So let's say you're a guitar player and you need to be 30 feet from the balanced connection available on your PA system. You can connect your guitar to this DI box with a normal and short TS cable, so that's unbalanced, and then run along, usually an XLR, balanced cable out from the DI box to the PA, and then you won't have to worry about noise that way. Now, I've never actually used one of these, so please research all of this on your own if that's something that you're curious about. I played a lot of gigs back in the day playing bass, but as you can see from the size of this stage, long cables weren't much of an issue. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover in this video. I hope it was helpful or useful for you. Please don't be shy about smashing that like button. That really helps me out. And please feel free to subscribe to the channel so you get notified when I post new content. That also helps me out. Thanks a bunch for stopping by, and happy music playing. Have a good day.